Hello everybody and welcome to Mr. Stansfield's Education Videos. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to make a double exposure. Now there are probably 20 different ways that you could do this in Photopea, but we're going to look at least one, maybe two. The first thing is we're going to be blending a portrait and a landscape, and so I'm starting with the portrait here. You can see that this portrait has a white background, which will be helpful in making a selection really easily. Having a solid color background is going to be a really easy way to get the portrait selected, which you'll see is an important step. So I'd say you're going to want to find an image that has a solid color background. Here it's white, although it doesn't have to be. And then the next thing is to get the landscape image. So here what I'm going to do is open and place from the File menu, and then selecting the photo that I want to use. The photo gets placed in here, and you'll see that there are these transform corners here, so you can actually edit the size of the photo, and you can transform the photo a little bit before you confirm the dimensions of the image. So this particular photo here, what I want to do is line up the buildings in the space where this person is in our photo. So what I'm going to do is take this layer opacity over here in the layers palette. I'm just going to turn that opacity down a little bit so that we can see where the blending is going to happen. And then I'm going to select the move tool, and that's the tool up here on the upper left. And then I want to click over here and choose transform controls. I want to make sure that that's checked so that when I move this layer around, I can then make it bigger and smaller. Now, when you're making it bigger and smaller, if you grab the corner here and you drag it around, you can see that the image is not bound by the original aspect ratio or the original dimensions. And so it's important to know that if you are doing what I'm doing right now, grabbing a corner and moving this around, if you don't want the image to get skewed, you would hold the shift key down. So as I'm holding the shift key, watch what happens. If I squeeze this image over here, you can see it's really squeezed. If I press the shift key, it'll snap to the original aspect ratio. And then as I kind of move the mouse around, it doesn't matter where my mouse is, if I kind of drag it out like that, I'm still holding the shift key, it'll give me the aspect ratio that I'm looking for. If I let go of the shift key, watch what happens. It'll go back to that. It'll let me kind of set it however I want. So I would say for the most part you want to hold the shift key to until you let go of the corner there. And then what I want to do here is just line up the city, I would say these sort of taller buildings in the area of this person's face. Once I do that, I'm going to confirm that by clicking the little check mark at the top, and then I'm going to uncheck transform controls just so I can work a little bit easier with this layer. I'm going to go over here to my layer. I'm going to rename these layers. I think this is important to try to just keep my layers organized here. You can rename both of them, person and city or person and landscape, whatever the case may be. The next step, I'm going to turn the visibility of this layer off by clicking on the little eyeball of the city, and then I'm going to select the person layer. And what I want to do here is zoom in a little bit. Control plus and then Control minus are good shortcut keys in Photopea, but you can also go over here to view and then zoom in and zoom out. You can see the shortcut keys are right there. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And then what I want to do is grab my Object Select tool. So that's this right here, Object Selection. And it's the fourth tool down, and then it's under the Magic Wand, or the Quick Select is the third one, is the Object Selection tool. The Object Selection tool, it's a pretty good tool. It works pretty good to select objects. It'll look at the contrast. It says the cross should be fully inside of the subject, so what I'm going to do is expand this. It's actually not fully inside the subject, so I'm going to actually expand this a little bit more. I want that cross to be inside the subject. It's not quite doing what I want, so let's try maybe that. Okay, so that did a pretty good job of selecting just the skin tone here, just the face. Let's try a different tool. Let's try the Quick Select tool. So we're going to go ahead and click that. And then we're going to click here. It got a little bit too much. So there our selection is a little bit too big. So I'm going to go up here to select and then deselect. So this is a little bit of a trial and error process. Let's just try the Quick Select tool and not the Object Select tool. Let's just click right here in the forehead and see if that does decent job of selecting. Yeah, okay, that's actually pretty good. You can see over here on the forehead and the side of the face it's not perfect. You can see perhaps over here in the collar it's not perfect. The edge of the shirt's not perfect. So it does a pretty good job of selecting our person here, but it needs some fine-tuning. And I'm going to do that manually with the lasso selection. So that's the next tool that I would recommend, although you could use any of the select tools, lasso, polygonal, magnetic lasso. You could use the magic wand or the quick select tool as well. I'm going to show you how to use the lasso tool because I think that's going to be the easiest. We want to zoom way, way in. So control plus, control plus, control plus, control plus, somewhere around here. And what we want to do is, you can see that when I hold the spacebar key, I get the hand grabber tool. But if you wanted to select the hand grabber tool on your own, you just click down here, and that'll allow you to move that photo around, and you can kind of use it. But if you have another tool selected, like the lasso tool, you just hold the spacebar key down, click, and then drag around. So this is, I would say, a really useful way of creating a selection while you're zoomed in without having to zoom in and then zoom out again. So, all right, here's what we're going to do. When you have the lasso tool selected, if you hold down the shift key, it'll allow you to add to the selection. So you can see the bottom of the ear here isn't quite perfect. So what I'm going to do is, starting inside of the selection and then kind of going out here, I can add to the selection. You can see it includes a little bit more. Space bar, click and drag. And same thing, I'm going to hold the shift key. And it's important to know that with the lasso tool, you always want to start inside the selection and then kind of go out to the area that you're trying to include and then wrap it up. So you're always drawing circles. This right here, I'm not too worried about it, but maybe this down here I want to edit. So hold the shift key, draw out, and then a circle. Okay, now I went too far out. So now how do I subtract from the selection? Well, you hold the minus, you hold the Alt key, and that'll give you the minus selections. You can see up here it changes it. So if I hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, I can go down here and kind of make a loop to get rid of a part of the selection. So Shift will add, and then Alt will subtract from your selection. So here you go. I'm going to go like this around the collar and then loop it around. That looks pretty good to me. This is imperfect, but you know what? It's actually fine. If you really wanted to, you could kind of go around there, try to get it to be perfect. But in terms of like this part of the photo, I'm just not that worried about it. So I might include this part right here, but going over here, remember I'm holding the spacebar key to grab the hand grabber tool. These guys here I want to edit, so I'm going to hold down the shift key and circle around like that. And you noticed I went around twice because I didn't hit it the first time. Let me show you what I mean. If I'm holding the shift key down and I'm like, oh, I missed it, I could let go, and it's going to add that part of the selection. Or what I could do is, watch this, shift, click and drag. Oh, I missed it, so I'll just go around again. Oh, I missed it again, go around again, and there we go. All right, and so that's going to add to the selection. It doesn't matter, if I went over here and added to the selection, I did this, it's not going to make any difference because this is part of the image is already selected. So working my way around, I'm going to work my way around here to manually edit the selection. And I'm using the lasso tool. You could use the lasso tool or any of those other selection tools like I mentioned. The stubble and the edge here of the face isn't quite right. That's okay. You'll see that actually this sort of rough edge like this, we're going to do something before we complete the next step. We're going to make this selection a little smoother. So after you make a selection, you can see that my lasso ends up being typically a lot smoother than the selection that here's a big chunk that's missing. And this is tough because of the lighting. Here we go, big circle. The hair looks pretty good. And then over here above the ear, we want to wrap that up. You'll see we can smooth the selection out. Oops, I got a little bit too much there. So again, the Alt key to subtract. And then I'll use the Shift key again just to kind of get this last bit in here. Maybe the Alt key again. Yeah, good enough. Okay. Command minus or Control minus to zoom out. Okay, so here's our selection. So if you go to select modify, and then you've got a couple of options here. You can either feather or smooth, and what I want to do is actually smooth, and I think typically 3 to 5 pixels looks good. Let's zoom in a little bit and see like where there was, you remember the rough edge here? So you can see that this selection is a lot smoother. It smooths out the selection pretty nicely. I think 3 pixels for most of our images that I've provided should be good. But if it doesn't smooth it out enough, then you could try a little bit of a bigger selection, a bigger smoothing radius on the pixels. All right. So we've made the selection. Now the next step is to add a layer mask to the city layer. So we need to turn that layer visibility on, click on the layer itself, bring the opacity up to 100, and then to add a layer mask to something, we're going to use this right down here at the bottom of the layers palette. It says add raster mask. We want to do that. Click the little circle within a rectangle there, and it gives us this black and white layer mask on the city layer. And you can do a couple of things now. What I would recommend doing is looking at the opacity, so change that opacity, and then see at which point do you have a pretty good blend. So do you want more of the person kind of showing or more of the city showing? And as you kind of drag this opacity around, maybe right around 50%, 50-50 is going to be good. Maybe it's going to be 30%, maybe it's going to be 70%. In this case, I think somewhere around 30 to 40% for this particular blend of 2 images looks pretty good. All right. And you could be done there, but I'm going to show you a couple of different things that you can do to change the way this looks. The other way that you can blend the 2 images is keep the opacity at 100, but then use a different blending mode. So with the city layer selected, once you've created your layer mask, if you go here, I'm going to recommend trying soft light first. This is a pretty good blend of the 2, but any of these blending mode, it's going to change the way that the image looks, right? Something like this, the difference blending mode doesn't really look good at all. Exclusion, no. Saturation, no. Color, no. Luminosity, no. All right. But basically, I would recommend trying them all. Like I said, I think soft light's going to work well for most of us in terms of this blending mode. And then you can change the opacity, right? So you can still bring the opacity down, but the blending percentage is going to be a little bit different depending on the layers, the images that you chose, and then also what your blending mode is here. But you can try any combination of opacity and blending modes there. The next thing that I'm going to recommend that we do for this project is to include some of the city in the outside of the layer mask. So one of the ways that you can create a selection is to actually click on the layer mask itself. If you hold the control key down and then click on this black and white box right here, this layer mask, you can see that the selection has been loaded. And then what I want to do is actually transform this selection by going up here to select and then choosing the inverse. So now I've selected the outside, basically all of the white space of this image, so the opposite or the inverse or the reverse. And then what I want to do is click on this layer, and then I want to make a new layer. And so what I'm going to do is copy this layer by clicking and dragging it down here. And it says city copy. I'm going to go here to the layer mask. And I could do a couple things. I could delete the layer mask and then create a new layer mask from the selection. Or I could actually just invert the layer mask itself. So I'm actually going to deselect and then go ahead and invert. So I can go here to edit and then invert, or is it image? Where is my inversion? Let's search. So whenever you're looking for something that you can't find in the menu, if you go ahead and type it into this little search box here in the menu, invert, image adjustments invert. So here's what I want to do. I want to go to image adjustments invert. If I hit escape, I can go here, image adjustments invert, and there it is. The shortcut key is Control I. So you can see here that the city copy now is going to show me why isn't that working? Let's see. That's why. All right. So after you do this with the city copy layer, what you want to do is change your blending mode to normal, and that'll bring that back. And so one of the things that we can do to this layer is actually blur it. So one of the cool ways of doing multiple exposure is kind of feature, parts of the exposure that are a little bit sharper than the others. With this city copy, you want to click right here on the city copy layer, and then let's go over here to filter and then blur. And you have a lot of options here. Gaussian blur is probably the one that you want to choose. And then I would actually crank this way up. So the default, yeah, that looks pretty good. Right, and what we can see is parts of the image sort of in front of and behind our person. You can choose kind of whatever, right? Like here, this becomes this sort of gradient of color, which is kind of interesting when you have your radius turned way up. If you lower it, you end up seeing, the rough outline of the buildings in a cityscape. For me, I think I like it a little bit more blurred, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK right here. And you can see that there's a smart filter attached to this layer now. So that Gaussian blur smart filter is attached to that layer, that city copy layer. That also looks pretty good as is. You can do a couple more things though. If you wanted to adjust one layer, watch what happens. So we're going to go down to the person layer here. And we're going to create an adjustment by going down to this little half circle, and you can see that that's a new adjustment layer. And you've got some choices here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and choose black and white. And I want to make this layer black and white. And the order of your layers really matters here. But if you had attached this black and white layer, or let's put this black and white layer above, you can reorder it. You can see that the city layer goes to black and white, but when it's below the city, it only affects the person. So the city color comes through, but the person, the black and white, this layer adjustment only affects what's below it. But let's say I only wanted to make the city do something. Well, if I click on the city, and then I go down here to half color, let's go into hue saturation, and let's bump our saturation up a little bit. I'm going to bring my saturation up. And I want that color to pop a little bit more. So those greens and blues are coming out a little bit. I think this is a little bit too much. So maybe somewhere in that 20-something range. Watch what you can do. If you hold down the Command and Option keys together and you click the in-between space, in between Hue Saturation 1 and City, basically in between your adjustment layer and the layer that you're trying to adjust, it will point this little arrow, and you can see here in the history it's called Enable Clipping Mask. So this is a little bit tricky, but if you hold down the Control key and the Alt key together and you click the in-between space, in between the adjustment layer and the layer itself, it'll clip that to that layer. So it only adjusts that layer. It doesn't affect the layer below. Watch what happens if we turn the black and white layer off, okay? When we clip it or we unclip it. So right now it's clipped to the city, but let's unclip it, hold down the Control and Option key, and then click in between again, and it will unclip. Oops, I kind of messed up. What did I do there? There we go. Oh, there we go. So you click on the layer itself, not in between, sorry. So it's Control and Option, and then you click on the layer, the adjustment layer, Control Option. It'll clip, or it'll enable or disable the clipping mask. So when it's not enabled, you can see that the skin tone of our person here gets pretty saturated, and those colors come out. But if you didn't want that, well, if you just wanted the city colors to pop, well, there you go. There's your hue saturation clipped to the city layer. So it's only affecting one layer. If you wanted the black and white to kind of come through on the person here, you could do that. The other thing you can do is add parts of your layer mask. So if you wanted to make only parts of the person black and white, you would do this with the brush tool. If you go over here to the brush tool, the shortcut key on the keyboard is B, select the brush tool, and then down here you can see you've got gray and black. Well, if you hit D on the keyboard, it'll give you white and black, and then X on the keyboard will switch those two, so you can switch between black and white. Now you can grab the brush size up here and then the hardness. I'm going to grab hardness 0 and I'm going to get a nice big brush, probably somewhere around 300 pixels. There we go. And then I click on the layer mask here. Well, if I paint with black, I can bring the color of his shirt back in. And that kind of makes those other colors blend a little bit differently. If I wanted to bring just the skin tone back, you can see by painting on the layer mask, what's happening over here, let's just look at the layer mask. This black area right here and the white area, the black area will hide what's happening on that layer. So just in the same way that we added our layer mask to the city layer, here we're adding the layer mask to the black and white layer, and we're bringing back some of the color of the face. Right? Maybe you only wanted to do an adjustment to part of it. I'm doing all of this just to show it to you guys. I'm not saying that you must do it one way or the other. But in this case, you may want the color to be in parts of the image and not other parts. Well, how do you paint with white? You just hit X, and over here it'll switch to white, and you can paint that back a little bit. So you can say like, well, maybe I want the color sort of just in his face a little bit, or maybe only around his eyes, or only around his forehead, or something like that. You can sort of blend it a little bit too. The other thing you could do is change your opacity and your flow. So if you turn those down, it'll paint partially, so you can kind of bring some of the color back in, or parts of the color, parts of the image should be black and white or color. So there you go. There is quite a few different ways of creating a multiple exposure. It's a little bit of a longer video, but you've got a lot of options here. So there you go.